Hello everyone, you read the title of the video, so let's get right into it. I played Switch X for 25 hours over the last 3 days and I must say, I am 100% sold on this weapon and will never put it down. Even with the issues it has, and it does have a few. Everything is of course based on the beta experience with pretty much no set building and only one X available. Please keep this fact in mind throughout the entire video. But let's actually talk about the positives first. I am very happy to have some actual defensive capabilities in the form of the offset slash in X mode and the counter in sword mode. Yes, I know Sunbreak had plenty of defensive switch skills and the amazing counter, but I'll talk a bit about Sunbreak later. The offset slash is a big meaty hit which feels just fantastic to land, especially when you topple the monster, and the sword mode counter or parry is a swift double slash leading directly into Heavenward Flurry and is accessible at basically any time in sword mode. It is the perfect tool to either survive a powerful attack you can't evade or to keep your flow going and keeping up the pressure on the monster. You can morph back and forth after almost any attack. You can morph attack from neutral. The morph fade slashes are faster now. Wild swing is more forgiving and you can dodge out of it at pretty much any point. Heavy slam can be performed after just 2 wild swings. There are 4 different ways to get to Power X mode. The new full release slash is an incredible addition to the moveset and you can flow perfectly into it after focus strike finishers in sword mode, and it leads straight to the spiral burst slash, giving you a big chunk of gauge back. Your overhead and rising slashes in sword mode let you move in any direction, which is really neat for adjusting your position in small ways without having to use the side steps, further increasing your flow and pressure on the monster. And focus mode is surprisingly natural to use in combat and lets you adjust your position fluently while attacking the monster. The damage seems to have been adjusted so that both modes are closer together in terms of potential DPS, which is also a welcome change, and yes, I will talk about the damage in a second as well, don't you worry. While many people praise how amazing Switch X is in Sunbreak, and I mean, yeah, it is a lot of fun, I love it too, honestly it is 95% sword mode. After the first monster roar, you're already amped up due to the counter. The wire bug reload makes your gauge management super easy to non-existent. The 2-staged morph slash also refills a huge chunk on both hits. It is amazing, but X mode has always been a bit troublesome to find usage, and Sunbreak was no exception. Even Power X mode is useless because it boosts the buildup of amp meter. Whoopie-doo. But end state also affects X attacks. Great. Still isn't remotely enough to make X mode viable. Iceborne is an interesting case because X mode basically was your stagger and part break mode, thanks to Power X mode, which increased the part break damage. Part breaker level 3 and Power X mode is super fun and pure animal abuse, but yet again no match for the DPS of sword mode, and keeping sword mode uptime was also not really a challenge here either. Keep in mind that of course you can still play X mode only, you can play however you want. I'm always an advocate to let people play however they want as long as they have fun. Talking about being effective and getting good times on hunts, sword mode has always been the focus because here lie all your DPS. In Iceborne the weapon was often reduced to its infamous ZSD spam thanks to the Rocksteady and Temporal Mantle, which is a shame because the weapon has so much to offer. Speedruns were also often reduced to spamming ZSD because it was just that damn effective in terms of DPS. Even Fatalis had no chance against the power that is 2 mantles and end state. But that seems to change with wilds, and some people are losing their minds over it. Switch X has changed more than I thought, and apparently more than most people thought. The switch gauge doesn't refill automatically anymore unless you sheath your weapon. You have to land attacks in X mode to refill gauge during a hunt. Because of this change, both modes have to be used constantly since the gauge also depletes faster. Thanks to the spiral burst slash, however, which can be accessed directly after almost every morph attack, you can very quickly restore switch gauge, not to mention the heavy slam, focus strike and offset attack can all be used to refill it pretty quickly. We finally have a Switch X iteration weapon that uses both modes of the switch axe. Crazy. And oh boy, here the troubles begin. The biggest issue in this beta was the overall damage output, according to basically all speedrunners and Swix mains in general, myself included. Motion values have been nerfed across the board, and the only way to get competitive times is by using the new full release slash at any opening possible, and no, I'm not counting the rock dropping runs. We have literally zero skills to work with. The devs stated we are playing an outdated build, and complaints that speedrunning times are all over the place were popping up everywhere. Not only for switch axe being low, but other weapons being surprisingly high or whatever. Again, it's a beta build with the most basic weapons available and no set building. I fully agree that the overall damage output seems too low. Again, keeping in mind it is a beta build, but looking at the data mined motion values, switch axe took a nerf compared to other weapons. I do not agree with the weapon feeling clunky to use or unsatisfying. The hit stop missing is annoying, but that is a problem for every weapon. You have so many options no matter what situation you are in, and you can get a wonderful flow going. Just my opinion, but clunkiness really isn't an issue. Personally, I think we simply didn't have enough time with the weapon and all new mechanics. As I mentioned earlier, I played for 25 hours and it took me a while to put all new mechanics to good use against Ray Dow and choose the proper action every time. We now have to keep Power Axe active for the 10% damage buff to axe attacks, build up switch gauge with axe attacks, figure out the proper timings for offset slashes and which follow-up to choose, use our switch gauge wisely in sword mode to build up amp meter, hit wounds and other weak spots and choose wisely which focus strike finisher to perform, decide whether we dodge an attack or are we in axe mode and can offset it, are we in sword mode to counter it, will I survive the chip damage since our armor is basically non-existent in the beta. Oh, I forgot to sharpen again. Oh, my switch gauge is empty and I have to manually morph back to axe mode. Oh, I'm underneath the morphing threshold and have to manually reload because I forgot I don't get any gauge just for waiting. Oh, I didn't reach amp state and the amp meter decayed. The monster is down. Do I have time for the full release slash? And am I even still in amp state, or do I need to use sword mode to get back to amp state? Or do I need to attack in axe mode to get back to sword mode? And all of this, all the time, during the entire hunt, while trying to keep Ray Dow from changing area by hitting it with flash pods or luring pods, and keeping an eye on its icon for the skull to appear so I can capture it with a pitfall trap, because the shock trap doesn't work on him. It is a lot to think about while playing switch axe in wilds. Especially since no one has that much experience as of now. Compare it to the game plan of longsword, for example, because what other weapon could I possibly choose? Oh, I need to build spirit levels. I'll just counter the roar and then do my one sheath attack to automatically build spirit gauge, and then I can use a shortcut to build my last 2 spirit levels. Oh, I'm gonna miss my helmbreaker. Let me just sheath the weapon mid-air and not lose anything. I landed the helmbreaker and can follow up with a powerful and quick finish. The monster attacks me, just let me use one of my 50 counters. I am exaggerating. I don't hate longsword. I am happy for every weapon that receives buffs. It is a PvE game after all, and we all work together to kill monsters, look cool while doing so, and make sick looking weapons and armor sets. But I think, with the little experience I now have with Wild's iteration of switch axe, that we have to think way more about what to do and when. I could be wrong, of course, but it just feels like that at the moment. I'm not even saying this is a bad thing, but dare I say the skill floor and skill ceiling have been raised quite a bit compared to 5th gen. And since for speedrunners the only viable option is to use the full release slash, which is a very committing attack with a long animation I can't cancel out of, many people complain that they only work to build switch gauge and amp meter for this one finisher, which I understand. And again, motion values are nerfed and should be raised again across the board, but the weapon doesn't suck, nor is it clunky to use. But some people feel like you only work to get the full release slash off, because that is the only move that actually can deal some damage. I tried to list the complaints I saw the most, or I have myself. Too little damage overall, only viable option is the full release slash. We talked about that one. After depleting the entire switch gauge, you will morph manually to X mode. In 5th gen and even before that, you still had the chance to morph attack to avoid the slow animation. I also don't really like this change. It was pretty much a skill thing. If I noticed the gauge depleting completely in time, an experienced player still had the chance to swiftly morph back to X mode without any punishment. That is gone now and hopefully gets fixed. But this ties directly into another issue. Sword mode in general just seems more expensive. The good thing is you get a nice chunk of switch gauge back when you enter amped state, otherwise you rely on your X mode to fuel sword mode. As of now, I would like to see just a tiny reduction in cost per hit for sword mode. It sometimes really feels too little until you have to morph back to X mode again. Just a bit more time between switching modes would be really nice. Dodge roll morph attacks have no directional adjustment anymore. In Iceborne you could redirect the morph attack, and in Sunbreak you could do a full 180 after a dodge roll. I do understand why. With focus mode you can still turn a bit, but since you can also just morph from neutral and have other options to avoid damage, I guess the dodge roll morph will be used only for the extra ground you cover, which is ultimately fine for me, but on the other hand, why take this option away from us? The timing of the wild swing into heavy slam is a little bit tight. Sometimes I was doing 2 wild swings and a regular overhead slash. I guess because I tried to do the heavy slam too early, the time frame could be a bit more generous here, but after a while I also got used to that smaller window, so this is just a small nitpick. The counter and offset have either too much chip damage or shouldn't have chip damage at all. I am almost certain it is a beta thing, since we are underpowered for right now in terms of defense. If we had access to skills or better armor sets, we wouldn't have to worry so much about chip damage. But what has to be a bug is that you cannot counter roars. You do ignore the roar, but the counter still fails, which just seems very weird since every other counter can do it just fine, and I am 95% certain I have seen a clip of a Japanese player countering the roar on a newer build they used on a show in Japan. But I also agree that both the counter and offset slash either need a perfect timing window to receive no damage at all, or at least let us take as little damage as Greatsword's shoulder tackle, for example. You can't swiftly chain into the discharge anymore. In 5th gen, you very quickly chain into the discharge or ZSD after the double sideways slash or the heavenward flurry. This is gone. Probably because we can now choose to do the ZSD or stay on the ground for a regular discharge. It is less fluent, which I don't like, but I guess that had to come with the freedom of choosing between ZSD and elemental discharge. That is it with the complaints list, and I cannot stress this enough. Other than the overall damage, nobody has enough experience with this weapon that received a lot of changes from the previous generation, and we have to wait for either another beta or a demo with a proper axe and a better build, or the full release and see what happens. You don't have to be a genius to see that the damage is too low and sword mode is pretty expensive. But there were still hunts where I didn't have any issue with gauge though, because I was utilizing all my tools to regain that gauge quickly with the spiral burst slash or offset finisher. But I fully understand that people get frustrated with it or feel like the weapon is clunky if you only played for like 1 or 2 hours after spending a lot of times with older titles. There are all these little things that just add up on top of the bad damage, and that makes people feel a bit upset about Switch X. Fully understandable, but I am certain on full release Switch X will be back to 5th gen glory. Remember to fill out the survey. I used up all 2000 characters to talk about Switch X, and so should you if you really want some things to change. Also remember that it is completely fine if you disagree with me or anyone in the comments. We all had our expectations, and for me personally, Monster Hunter Wilds Switch X has lovely additions, lots of potential for another 1000 hours of Switch X, but lack of damage and smaller issues which could be easily resolved by the devs or set building and skills perhaps, are holding the weapon back. I always wanted to use both modes, ideally even for optimal DPS, and we are on the verge of exactly that. This iteration could be an actual Switch X, not a big sword and a mobility option for when your sword's battery is empty. Anyway, here are my proposed just fixes for the weapon for the full release. Overall, damage buff across the board, a slight reduction of switch gauge consumption, bigger damage reduction on successful counters, and offsets, or just straight up no damage. Give us an option to access the sword mode counter from X mode. Let us morph attack back to X mode again after depleting the gauge, just like before. A bigger window for the heavy slam input after the second wild swing. This is a small one, but anyway. Other than that, I am very happy with the weapon and I cannot wait to play more. Let me know in the comments what you think, but keep it civil and I hope to see you in the next videos. Happy hunting, guys.